Hi, I'm Esther.
And I'm Sean.
I write about AI news here at TechTarget in Massachusetts.
And I edit Esther's stories.
We're here to talk with tech experts about everything AI and ChatGPT.
Don't forget Google Gemini.
Whether it's who's ahead in the generative AI race, the metaverse, digital twins, or even the latest in autonomous vehicles, we've got it covered. Right, Sean?
Yep, we've got it covered.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Targeting AI podcast. Today, we are joined by Mark Beccue, an analyst with TechTarget's Enterprise Strategy Group. Previously, Mark was an analyst at Futurum Group and Omdia. Thank you so much for joining us on today's show.
Thanks for having me.
So, Mark, we want to dive a little deep into your background. I know that you've been an analyst for about 16 years now, which is a long time. How did you get into tech and AI?
I worked for a tech firm that was involved in mobile technology. So it was one of those software companies that worked on clearinghouse services for global mobile operators. So I was in there in the greenhouse portion of that. So building new products, trying to figure things out. And all of that was about total addressable markets and where are things going and all of that kind of stuff. And I was really part of my job was forecasting, right? So what's going to happen, what's going to go, and I was like, wow, I really like that. And so I felt like that was a better fit for me, and I discovered there were people to do that, so I became an analyst.
That's a funny fit story. So, how has your perception of AI changed in the past few years, and especially with the rise of generative AI from the time you began to now?
So my journey started. This is will help. I was with that company. I was working on some messaging products, and always got interested in how that was. You think this was 20 years ago. Messaging was just kind of coming out. Smartphones had not really been launched yet. As we kind of moved into 2018, 2008, and the smartphones started, really the iPhone got introduced, there was more emphasis around messaging. And I started looking at Slack and I'm like, what's going on with this? There are these things that they're putting on there called taco bots and cat bots and all this. I was like, what is this bot thing? And, dug under the sheets a little bit. And that was early 2015. So you had this new, what I was finding was that was kind of the rebirth of AI when predictive AI started to really take off or started to be thought about again. It was because of uh, cheap compute. And so there were these bots, and got interested and started writing about Slack bots. And my old boss said, "Hey, I want you to start writing about virtual assistants because we think these are going to be something." So that was my start around natural language and what was going on and how that goes. But what really has changed, if you're asking that, at that time you had compute got cheap, but the real thing that was tough was you really needed some expertise. You had to build your own data to train models on. You had to find that. Nobody had enough. You had to have data scientists who weren't working in academics, and they were few and far between. So things kind of moved along a little relatively slowly, if you think about it, from 2015 till Gen AI hit us in, what was that, November of 22. And it was moving kind of at a pace, but there were these restrictions. And then all of a sudden, here we have this idea where there's some scale to things, and it really just opened the door for a lot of new thinking around AI.
Very interesting. I remember when I first got into this beat, there was like this idea of like an AI winter, right? So, yeah, do you still think? And then it's like, boom, Gen AI. Do you still think that we went from like a winter to like a very very hot summer?
Well, you and I joke about this, and I say I didn't have a gray beard before Gen AI, and I didn't have a beard before Gen AI, but when I grew one, it all of a sudden it came out white. So I'm like, what the heck? Um,
It's the winter.
yeah, it's not the winter. It just drove everybody crazy. I think what's kind of interesting is it's really been an inspired thinking. People have been inspired. I don't know if there was really a winter. If you're asking if there was a winter right before Gen AI and what we're experiencing now, what I'd say is we ran up against some things that weren't going to move things forward so much. They were moving at a pace, right? But then when you introduce these concepts that you can do things at scale and you don't need necessarily a data scientist on staff to do things, and then just the potential for a lot more automation at scale and a little cheaper was really inspired a ton of people. We're now, to your point, I think that reality is set in. It's like, okay, well, it's not, a magic wand somebody's waving and all of a sudden it works. Well, it doesn't do that. It doesn't work like that. And I think that we're really seeing a lot of folks understand that, okay, a lot of the lessons and what we learned about investment in AI before Gen AI is absolutely applicable to where we're going. And the pragmatists and the folks that are disciplined know this and they're moving forward at a steady pace.
I wanted to ask about what you said, about, in the beginning, there was like this idea of you needed to have the skill. Like this, it seems like there was a higher caliber, right? And now we moved from that to like low code, no code, and now generative AI with AI agents. Do you think it's a good thing? Or do you think that perhaps it brought down the quality a little bit?
We're still sorting through it, really. If you think about it, these are promises. I just think that when you get to enterprise grade solutions, and I'm going to set aside, people fooling around with Chat GPT or the models where they're talking to trying to figure out how to write something or ask these questions, the search and stuff like that. Let's set that aside and say at the enterprise grade level takes some forethought uh, and more investments. And I think that we're finding that maybe you don't need a data scientist, but we're in some really totally different new ground. Who heard of RAG a year ago? I didn't. I'd never heard of it. Models are coming out every other day, and we're still in the middle of trying to figure out how to wrestle this thing to the ground so that it'll work. It's just really early days still, and that made sense, right? When something explodes like this, the first thing you're going to see is people running around with their hair on fire, trying to figure things out, throwing ideas up against. Well, I'll use my Slack example, right? That started with cat bots and taco bots, and it was like, well, I've actually likened AI right now to the earliest days of the App Store, right? So when the App Store came out, they just opened it up, said third party, come figure out what you want, and it was all the stupid stuff like taco bots and whatnot, right? And then as time went on, people figured out how to use it and what was useful and how to make things that made sense. It's really a parallel. I think that we're in the same place and people are trying to figure this out. We don't have the killer use cases yet.
Interesting. Going back to my questions now, because I kind of pivot a little bit there. So, ESG recently published a survey about the state of the generative AI market. Can you discuss the survey and who did the survey and what were your findings?
It's a longitudinal survey about the state of AI. We did one last year. This one it's comprehensive. It's a nice look across. We had over 800 qualified responses from all over the world. And the what we went with once you asked the question was, do you have generative AI in either POC, early production, or mature production? And those 832 did. So there was a bigger group, but who answered most of the questions after that question, or the only thing we considered after that were folks that were kind of in this mode, right? So that's kind of the setup to it. And we had some really interesting findings that I think a lot of people are going to find are a little counter to what they're hearing.
Can you expand on that? What do you mean by counter to what they're hearing?
The first thing we asked was, where are you, right, in this journey? And what we found was when you ask people if they were in POC or beyond or that kind of thing, what we found was about 30% of the total that we looked at were in either mature or early production, and then another 33% were in POC of some sort. If you're familiar with diffusion of innovation theory, that's the acceleration of how markets adopt anything. It's been applied to technology for a long time. It was a theory by E.M. Rogers that was put out in the early 60s. And it's that curve, that bell curve you always see. You got early adopters or pioneers, and then early adopters. And then you hit a point where the curve of adoption accelerates. So if I take this number, what we're translating as here is, so you heard me say 8%, 22%. That's 30%. So in innovation, diffusion of innovation theory, you start to accelerate in a market to what's called early growth stages are once you hit 16 to 17%. What we're seeing is what I would could translate as you're into you're the acceleration part of this curve and you're heading towards mass market. This is mass market adoption, basically. So I think that's counter to what we've heard a lot of people talking. You mentioned a little bit earlier, is there winter? Is there, hesitation? And even if you just considered the 30%, right? So the ones that are in production, you got 30% in production. That shows you that we're buckle your seatbelts because we're in acceleration phase.
The 30% shows that we are in acceleration phase, but right, is there different grades to that, right? Because what does that mean exactly? Are we just like perhaps using ChatGPT plus, or are we delving into it and doing like a AI workload, creating our own generative AI system? Did you guys look into that at all?
Question was, where are you in your journey and with Gen AI? So it's not that specific. Some of the answers you could give was, we're in mature production. We use generative AI across the enterprise. That was one answer. The second was early production. We are developing usable insights and strategizing about broader use cases. Those are kind of the way we had it set. So it wasn't real specific to what they were doing, though we did look at use cases and things like that a little later. But not in this question to answer that part, it was not that specific.
It also looked at some of the challenges, right, as well,
Mhm.
right? And so, what were some of the challenges that you guys delved into in the survey?
Yeah, where there were little glitches, and I would like to talk about how there were some. We found that there was some maturity. Uh, People in this group, again, what we're talking about, that group of those percentages that we said were in production or POC, had some very mature um, approaches, and I'll get back to that. But yeah, the unsettled part really got to. There's really no consensus around what the top priority for Gen AI is, and this goes back to what we were talking about a little earlier about we had asked them, are you doing product development, software development, customer service, research, IT operations, all these different things. And when we asked them what their top priority was in their organization, we didn't get anything that was dominant. They were pretty low in their answers, but it was all over the place. So they basically said 15 different areas. So to me, the highest one they had was 11%. That doesn't tell you that there's anything um, going crazy. So I would say there's really no consensus in a broad sense around what the top priority for Gen AI is. So that's one thing that's a low, not settled. This was one stat that I think was really interesting. 63% of our respondents, against this is that group that is doing something, said they feel that the changes are needed to support infrastructure before they can proceed with Gen AI. So, there's a lot of implications there to, time to market delays, and, maybe you're going to potentially shift this to building in house to doing some outsourcing. So that shows a lot of kind of not moving quickly there. They're thinking about it. And another one, just quick, was thinking about this one question that you and I've talked about many times is where are we going with these models, right? Is it going to be proprietary? Is it going to be open source? And there's no consensus there. It looks like it's probably both. And open source hasn't been out there that long in mass, and we're already at like 43% we're using both already. So that shows you a little indecision as well.
I wonder if when you talk about infrastructure, right, are we talking about perhaps GPUs or stuff like that? Is that what you guys mean by that
Uh,
infrastructure question?
it can include that, but it might be more like the development platforms they're using, the tools they're using. It means everything, and not everybody is running their own. Most people aren't running their own GPU, so it's really everything that gets you to being able to build an app.
When you talk about open versus closed source, and it seems like despite the little amount of time that the open source models have been out there, it doesn't really matter, right? So it's just about getting it out, regardless of what brings you to that point.
Think of models as a Swiss. There's a lot of tools, right? You're going to have multiple ones. Nobody's going to have just one. We've seen them kind of diversify, right? The models. Some of them are much smaller. Some of them, you might need. So if you go to a non-open source kind of thing, then you're getting full support for that and what's going on with it. It costs you a little bit differently. I don't know if cost is really the driver for open source or not. It's not necessarily cheaper because you have to have expertise, right? And look at a lot of other issues. So I think that people are thinking about how to use these things and they're understanding that not one model fits everything that they need. So they're kind of looking through to see what works for them in certain instances.
Very interesting. You spoke about some of the use cases. So, um, in your opinion, we're kind of at that peak stage of usage, right? Based on the survey. So, what are some of the surprising use cases of generative AI that you guys found?
We found this. There was more of an attitude, let's call it that. What they were aspirational, right? So I'll call it aspirational. And there was two areas. We asked them, where do you see this? Where do you see this unlocking for you? What kind of thing will it unlock for you? And it was three areas. One, it's a lot of interest in this idea of AI agents. Over two-thirds of our respondents are planning or considering AI agents, which is a big deal. But this is really new, and it might be suffering from. I think I mentioned to you before, we talked about taxonomies and what's an agent versus a co-pilot versus whatever. And there's really not a lot of good definitions yet where the industry is settled. So somebody goes, "Oh, I want an agent," and they don't really necessarily know what it means. But there's a lot of interest. So if you consider it, that's 67% is a lot. They're either planning to do that, they're going to integrate it extensively, or they're considering leveraging these agents for specific use cases. So I think that's a really big one. The other two, we had an interesting data point. 64% of those respondents believe that Gen AI will deliver significant value in innovation and creativity. So this is we called this aspirational, right? It's not very specific, but they felt like, well, okay, is Gen AI going to give us new, better ideas, good ideas? And what I was drawing a conclusion there and thinking that I believe that's due to the hope that Gen AI will unlock the power of their proprietary data so that they can develop these insights that lead to better products or better operations or whatever it is. So that was the second one. So think of it as agents, value, creating value for innovation and creativity. And the last one was a really big chunk too. Became 60% of the respondents said they believe Gen AI would deliver and this is significant, transformative or significant value in customer service and satisfaction. So there's great hope that that's going to happen. And I would tell you, we circle back to what we talked about a little earlier. The leading investments by far before we got to generative AI were in customer service automation. Most of the money in the industry, whether it was startups or whatever, was in that. So, and I would say the Gen AI investments in customer service or customer experience are going to be even higher.
Very interesting. I want to first start with what you talked about AI agents, right? You said that there's not really a consensus of the definition, right? So, what is your definition or ESG's definition of what agents are, right? And is this like obviously it seems like this might be the next wave of generative AI? And what exactly is the expectation? Is it living up to it?
It's a good question. So we have not completely landed on our definition yet, but I'm leaning towards a an AI that is either single task oriented or multitask oriented, and you'd have an interface to it that would be in natural language. So those are kind of a couple of different criteria. Would be this idea that you're communicating with an AI in natural language, and it's either going to do one single task or it's going to do single step task or multi-step tasks. And so you have kind of a spectrum of AI agents. So the ones that are coming out right now, I'm not that. So Copilot would fall into that. Some Copilots would fall into that. But I would also say that typically the agent is very specifically focused, right? It's saying, I'm going to help with HR, or I'm going to, you know, do expense reports or something like that. And it's the beginning of what I'd call the holy grail of AI, which is, in my opinion, one of the holy grails of AI is: are we moving towards this interface with software, where we have this new interface? We had the GUI, we had, I don't know what else you want to call them, the touch and stuff like that. But here we are. Will we be, over the next 10 years, starting to have an interface where we tell software what to do, and it figures out how to go do it? And so that, to me, is the beginning of the agent definition.
Do you think they will live up to expectations, right? Because when I think of agents, I was going to ask this question later, but I guess I can start asking now, is the idea of AGI, right? Is agents. I see your face. Is agents the phase that leads us to artificial intelligence?
uh, yeah, there's some really great stuff from the academic side when they talk about general intelligence. There's still a really pretty good chunk of the smartest people thinking about it's like, this is totally impossible. It's not. It's never going to happen. There's too many. There's too many unique elements of human nature, human existence, that cannot be replicated by general intelligence. So maybe they redefine the what they mean by that. But sentient and all of that, I'm sorry, you can take that to the bank. You're not going to have that for a long time, if ever. So the job where they're hoping this goes is a little more the traversing part that to use. So, but let's go back and say, what's tough about this? There is some really interesting thinking from a few companies. IBM in particular is thinking about this multi-step process for an agent. They have the beginnings of this in a product called Orchestrate that I talked to them about recently. And what they it was kind of interesting how they described the challenges, right? So you have all these different um, pieces that gate pieces of software, right? So you have think of it as there's interoperability issues. So you have APIs that an agent might have to talk to another agent, or it's got to get the permission to get into another software. So there's the security pieces that are a challenge. um, and that might be the biggest one, like understanding threads of how they can traverse between things. So when you to get to multi-step, just in that sense, right, where you get to a multi-step process that's outside of a specific software, that takes some thinking, and IBM has been thinking about it. um, we're seeing advancement, right? So let's step back and go, where are they kind of starting to resonate now? Is it's a big announcement yesterday from Salesforce about Agent Force, they're calling it. And this is just literally they've been embedding AI into their software for a while. So now they're using that agent as a way for you to interact and direct that software to do something, but it's within their guardrails, right? So it's like, oh, it's not going outside of that, it's staying within this Salesforce universe of application to do something, which makes a lot of sense. So um, one of the things I think it'll be a challenge about agents is, well, how many do I have? Do I, well, if I got to have like a password folder for all the agents I'm supposed to talk to or not? It's like, okay, that could get confusing. Interoperability is always an issue. We don't have any standards. So, we'll see how it goes.
I also wanted to ask about the third kind of big use case you spoke about, which is customer service. And it seems
Mhm.
like this is really where the money is when it comes to generative AIs. Like this is where people are, I guess, settling their focus, right? Do you think it'll always be like that, or are there any other? There's two part of to the question: is will it always be like, will we're always using Gen AI for mainly customer service focused, and then is it, are we ever going to get to a point where AI replacing jobs, right? Could that be
Right.
the case?
There's a lot of pieces to that, right? So, um, what I think is piquing people's interest about using AI for customer service is really mining um, specific insights on a particular person, right? How we are able to so think of it as a little more of a spectrum and not like an agent really working with you. Oh, I'm going to figure out what you need. Maybe they will. Yeah, and I mean, I think there's a lot of people Salesforce is working on it. They showed a lot of things yesterday that might be along those lines. So really understanding, like pulling your data. We've been talking about this forever, but the idea is, do they know me? Does AI help companies figure out that they know this customer well enough, have all that information in one place, and be able to act on it quickly? That's really where I think companies are thinking, and that might be assisting a human to do that. So bringing all that together for them real quickly, or it could be that automated that's automation in itself. Think about that. It's like, well, I don't know if I'm going to get a refund on this or not, or like cost adjustment on this. Humans have to go through a whole process of policies to figure that out. If you can automate that, makes it faster. Customer gets more happy real quickly. Those are the kinds of things where I think we're going to see that. But I think what it is there's so much in it, particularly in a competitive market, right? So you can do that two ways. One would be the U.S. in general, or North America in general, is broadly seen as a very competitive market. Almost everything is very competitive. So what you differentiate on is customer service and customer satisfaction. There's a lot of logic to that, then you can extend that to other markets where something might not be that way across the board within a region, but it is for a vertical. So, yeah, I think that money spent there is money well spent, particularly for competitive markets.
Pivoting now to some of the things that you and I have talked about is just the way that things are being pushed out a little bit in the market, right? What would you say are some of the biggest challenges you see for generative AI products from Google, OpenAI, and other AI vendors?
So I'll give you a comparison of market, right? So we have legacy or predictive AI, let's call it, versus Gen AI. And what I think is interesting is there's two very different ways that the market's developed. When predictive AI started to come out, what you had was a ecosystem of vendors started to appear that were very focused on use cases. So it worked from the in back, right? They would say, "Oh, we're going to do, you know, customer service automation, or we're going to do whatever," and different. So the market was dominated by what I'd call end-to-end solutions, where you could go get this, and it wasn't core to what you did as a company. You didn't have to figure it all out. You just hired these people to run, to integrate into your systems and then do something. Right? That was the way it was. The difference with Gen AI right now is that companies, or particularly enterprises and organizations, are looking this as they seem to want to build something. They don't know what it is, but they want to build it. To be fair, the market, that's the way the market's been developing. There's not a lot of end-to-end solutions. The ones that have emerged are in SaaS, right? So you have people like Adobe and Salesforce and ServiceNow and Zoom are all SaaS products, and folks that have they've been invested in AI for a while, so they've embedded it in, and that's how organizations are going to consume Gen AI or AI in general, right? So, but the difference, like I said, is awful lot of people seem to want to build something, but they don't know what they want to build. So I'm like, okay, well, that's unusual. It's a little different than what we saw in the earlier days.
I always wonder, and I think maybe it might have actually. Does that mean that a lot of money is being wasted, and at the end of the day, we might look down a year or two from now and be like, "Well, why did we? Why do you need that?" you know?
Ugh. I think it's a reflection. Okay. Again, if you study technology disruption, innovation, or innovation of any kind, this early period is very disruptive. It's very unsettled. Makes sense. There's lots of different people trying things out. A lot of experimentation, and I think that's what it is. That it's not necessarily a waste. It's just the way that a market develops. It's never a sure bet, right? I think that's a natural progression. There's one piece to it that I think maybe folks are onto something here, and I think it's what we talked about up front about the promise of AI is this leverage of your data. And I think organizations are still trying to figure out a very core question, which is um, how much of this do I need to centralize to my organization? It's the first time in a long time. Maybe if you looked at web or something like that, or digital transformation, and said, well, at our core, does this need to be a core competency of what we do, right? Do we need AI in everything? And I think that's really where we are, as people are trying to figure that out. And the answer might be, my guess is the answer is no. That it's you're going to figure out things that you own in AI, but it's not going to be everything. It doesn't make sense unless it doesn't necessarily fit to your core competency. So I think that's where we are. Is our people are trying to figure that out.
Speaking of data, you've always talked about the need for like good data, right? So,
Mhm.
what kind of uh, what would you say do you think AI vendors are getting wrong about good data for AI systems, and what are they getting right?
So I'm not blaming this on the vendors. I think we're looking at an age-old problem. It's really fun to listen to the market right now, and what's going on, and it's really kind of ironic. But it's an old saying: "What goes around comes around." And I've heard over the past few days, and a very consistent message, that there was this long promise, of we've exploded with the amount of data we have, right? And companies and organizations just went, "Oh, we're going to keep it. This is our data. We're going to go store it somewhere. And we don't know what we're going to do with it, but we have it, right?" So they keep it. They don't know how long they're going to keep it. There was for 20 years, I think in technology, we've talked about big data, right? How do you mine your data and leverage it, and to be nobody's ever solved that. It's been an issue for 20 years, and now you bring in AI, and I think people see that there's a path. And so the answer to your question is it's really not the vendors. The AI vendors are not an issue here. It's companies have to do data management, data governance. They have to figure out a way to flow data to the AI or AI to the data, however you want to put it. But they've set up lots of challenges in terms of silos. They have it in different places. They have different securities for things they can use and can't use. They have duplication. They have a data management and governance issue, not an AI issue. And so I think we're seeing a huge movement from what AI has said and promised is that folks are starting to really work on that. I'm seeing a ton of movement there with companies getting better and better about how to clean this up.
You've also spoken about like how few vendors are seeing ROI when it comes to generative AI applications. What kind of companies do you think are seeing ROI, and why are they so successful?
There's a secret formula here, and a lot of people aren't going to want to hear it. But basically, where I've seen success in AI are from companies that have been invested in it for a significant amount of time. I've mentioned a few of them here. They had the patience and foresight to say, I'm going to invest in AI. It was before Gen AI. And these companies have been able to leverage it. And I'm going to talk about not vendors, but what I'd call companies that have thought about this and how it applies to their business, right? So that's the three that I'll mention are four: Adobe, Salesforce, ServiceNow, and Zoom are good examples. And I'm going to pick on Adobe for a second and tell you that they've been invested in AI for 10 years. And they did it in a way where they said, we think there is potential here for this to help us do what we do better. That was their driver, right? They said, so how does this help us do something better? And let's talk about that for a second. When you think about their business is around image, helping creatives create content, mostly in the image space, videos, images, all those types of things. So they're creating marketing, mostly marketing content. And they saw that that's something that had a lot of manual process to it, even when you had it in SaaS. And so they were able to figure over time how to use AI to automate a lot of these things. And then they were ready when generative AI just hit the market, and they were able to say, okay, we know parameters of what this does, and now we can leverage it. Their numbers they're accelerating. If you compare them to what they do with image generation, to either the startups like Stability AI, which makes no money. OpenAI doesn't make any money on this. And then you've got Shutterstock and Getty Images and people like that. But Adobe is running full speed with this, and it's what I think is important about it is it's embedded in their business, right? So Firefly, that product that does image generation, now video generation, fits perfectly into what they were trying to do and solve problems for their customers. So it's a great use case. It's paying dividends for them in terms of revenues. So I go back to saying you have to be invested for a while and you have to think about what it's going to solve. And I think they hit it out of the park.
It seems to me you're saying that this like 24 months, 18 months, 24 months is too quick for some businesses, right? It's too quick of a turnaround to say, are you going to be successful in this? It's almost like you would have had to had like a crystal ball 10 years ago to be like, this is going to be really big, right?
Maybe things will accelerate now, right? But yes, in a way, these are pioneers. They're a handful of companies, 10, 20 big companies. And those that I mentioned had the forethought to go, well, what is it? They were willing to, they may have made bets on other things other than AI, right? But they just said, how do we get better at what we do? And they kept being curious about what that would bring, and they were willing to invest money and be patient with whatever that technology was to run its course to say, okay, this is going to be good or bad. And so let's set that aside, right? What happens next is pioneers show you a path, right? They develop the best practices. And so in my opinion, um, companies that are entering it now have to learn that in one instance is that you have to be there's lots of lessons to learn. One is you have to be patient, you have to be willing to invest, you have to understand that it's full life cycle management things that you have to look at, right? So and I think that the other piece, which is important, is really go back to business discipline, which is what problem am I trying to solve? Sometimes that's going to be piecemeal, but sometimes it's not. And I think that's where it's just pragmatic to say. Then I'll circle back to what I told you at the beginning. When I was working in the for that software vendor, it's called Cineverse, it's still out there. Um, our process was a gating process. It's called, business case, right? I built business cases. So what you had to do is say, what's the problem we're trying to solve? What's the market for it? How am I going to get there? What are the issues? And you have a gating process to everything. So if we make this market, it's okay, we're going to go forward. If it's cost too much, we're going to stop. All of those types of ideas make sense. And nobody let us spend any money on it. We never did anything broad. It was like, well, this is a product that we think we need, or this is a need we think we can address. That has to happen. People have to go back to that idea. And if they do, they're going to be okay. They won't, to your point earlier, if they're all invested in this and they think they lost money, well, a business case gating process takes care of that. It's like, okay, we spent enough money and we know we're going to stop. So I think business discipline and people remembering that they're in this, what they do is driven by business discipline, will serve them well.
So right now, a lot of enterprises are faced with many choices, right? When it comes to generative AI systems and models, what do you tell your enterprise clients about model choice and making sure they don't miss out on the next best or be driven into like this is the next flashy thing, so let me go and jump on it.
I think that in a lot of ways, what the hyperscalers offer gives you a good chance to try things out with not a lot of investment. So think of it that way, right? If you go to, there are four, right? So if it's AWS, you go to Microsoft, Google, or even IBM, and you said, all right, we're going to work with this stuff in the cloud. We're going to access some data, and they have a full stack of stuff. They have tools, they have libraries, they have options for models to use. And what's good about working in the cloud is that the upfront you're going to pay a little differently, right? You pay by use and that kind of thing. But it gives you don't have to make the capex investments, right? You're not going, oh, I'm cutting a deal with you know, uh, Claude or, Cohere or whatever. Don't worry about it. You can try these different things and almost sandbox it. I'll give you another one that's interesting. Go a little bit further. There's within those scale hyperscalers. I'll give you an example. Um, AWS does something called the Hyperpod, where you can run models in a kind of like an environment where you can test it. Right, you can test it without a lot of getting to production, and it doesn't cost you that much, and you can look for redundancies and all these kinds of things. It's just an example of a lot of tools that are available from all of those hyperscalers that you could try at not a lot of capex cost, right? You're going to run some operational costs. Great place to do POCs before you make bigger investments.
We're rounding up a little bit now. I wanted to ask you, we've spoken about how the market is and what the state of the market is. What do you think about the future, right? What do you think the state of generative AI will be? And what's the next big thing after that?
AI is here to stay. I don't think this is a swing and a miss at all, any way, shape, or form. It's shown, like we told said up front, it's shown that it'll work. What's funny is we're falling back to the idea that basic, not basic, foundational organizational um, policies and ideas hold true. They don't change. So it's like, what problems are we trying to solve? Who do we want to be? Where are we? You ask those questions about what are we best at? What do we, there was this great question that we have a whole study on. It's build, buy, or partner. It's a classic question. What do we do where we should really be, own this, or where do we do this better where we outsource? And if you stick to that, we're going to see, you know, incredible. We're going to see more and more dividends on this, and it's going to be. Go back to the premise of Gen AI and AI in general is reducing redundancies. Reducing redundant work, eliminating processes that humans have to do that are better done by automation. So, you go back to all these funny things we talked about with general intelligence and things like that. What holds true is that generative AI and AI in general is good at um, running through tons of data that humans couldn't do quickly, or automating tasks that are redundant and that humans don't want to do. That's where we're going to be. That's where it's going to go. We're going to get better and better at it. I can't. It's been such a amazing change in less than 2 years. We're coming up on 2 for generative AI, and the explosion of how we've changed that in that time is mind blowing. I can't even. That's why I said I got the grade because of this. It's like wow, amazing. And with that kind of acceleration, we're in for a ride. It's going to be amazing. I think it's going to be really cool.
Yeah, it's definitely changed a lot in the past 2 years, and it seems like it's just going to continue to change and
Mhm.
continue to grow. But thank you so much, Mark, for joining us on today's conversation. Very insightful and very, I really liked it a lot. So thank you very much for that. To our audience, please connect with Mark on LinkedIn and also check him out on TechTarget's ESG website. I think you do blogs there, right, Mark?
We do.
Okay. So please read his content. If you like this content and all about other interviews, please leave us a review, a comment, and share it on your social media platforms. Thank you, and we'll see you next time on the Targeting